Sometimes the walls we build are not to keep people out, but to keep ourselves in, to hold the fragile pieces of who we are until we learn how not to hand them to the wrong hands. Today, I want to talk about the kind of boundaries that save your sanity and the cost of not having them. For a long time, I thought boundaries were for other people, the strong ones, the confident ones, people who could say no without their voices shaking. Me, I thought love meant making room for everyone, no matter how uncomfortable it made me. I thought being good meant being agreeable. I thought peace came from keeping the peace. But here's the truth I had to learn, and I learned it the hard way. There is a big difference between keeping peace and losing yourself. Let me share a poem that captures that confusion, that place where love and boundaries got all tangled up. Dysfunctional. I thought love was an open door. No hinges, no locks, no guard. A space where broken feet could wander free, tracking mud on the floor of my soul. Each step, a weight I swallowed silently. I said yes when my spirit whispered no. Handed my fragile trust to tremble hands, called it grace. But grace without wisdom is just a wound left open to bleed again. I called it loyalty, chains wrapped in velvet lies, binding me in shadows I refused to name, a sacrifice with no end. Peace traded for smiles cracked at edges, pretending the fractures were invisible. I was the garden that was left unattended, roots choked by weeds of fear and regret, a prisoner of kindness worn like armor, too scared to draw lines, too weary to fight. But now, I carve boundaries in the shifting sand, not to shut out storms, but to shelter the woman rising inside, the one who finally hears her worth and guards it fiercely against trespass. That poem shows the confusion I felt back then. Now, let me tell you what I learned from my marriages, because I've been married 3 times and each one revealed something about how I was standing firm on my boundaries. In my first marriage, I learned quickly love can turn into walking on eggshells. But I stayed quiet to keep the peace. In my second, I confused loyalty with self-sacrifice, bending until I broke just to keep the relationship together. By the time I reached my third marriage, I thought I had learned enough to do better. But here's the truth. I still hadn't set boundaries before I stepped into it. If you don't have boundaries set going into it, it's much harder to build them in the middle, and that's something that I had to learn, and it took me a while to figure that out. My third marriage, it was my wake-up call. I made excuses for lies. I let my yes replace my no's, even when my spirit was screaming otherwise. I absorbed the tension, thinking my role was to keep the peace, no matter the cost. It took time, but I finally realized the real cost was myself. It wasn't that I just stopped loving him. It was more of I finally started loving myself enough to set limits. That's when I understood boundaries aren't just a relationship tool. They're the foundation we set before you open the door to romance, friendship, family. But the lessons didn't stop there. As the marriage was ending, I remember having a moment where I felt like a few bricks was already falling down, and I was okay with the decisions that was being made with the end of the marriage. But when it was ending, I thought the hardest part was behind me. I was finally in this space where I can just be me. But no, without my knowledge, he invited my mother to live with us. And this is very important to share within this season of life because all of these experiences shaped me. All of these experiences made me look at myself and be able to put myself in a position to protect myself, not from others, but for myself. Now, I want to say I love my mother, but she was the first person who taught me I didn't get to have boundaries, that my role was to do what I was told, even if it meant silencing myself. Living with her again brought back some unhealed wounds. I mean, being talked down to, prayers that didn't feel like love, and the unspoken message that my worth was in serving others. On the outside, oh, I held that thing together. Woke up every day, still cute, pulling it together, still doing what I needed to do. But on the inside, I was crumbling, because on the inside, I felt like I was still attached to something that I was trying so deeply to get away from. This is a moment where I really had to take inventory of my life. And as I was dealing with the marriage, and I set boundaries in that space, which ended the marriage. And then I had to deal with my mom, and I was setting boundaries in that space that I never had set before. And I was in a place where I was a little excited and I thought I was healing, but I understood that there was still some more healing needing to be done. There was other places in my life where I had not set boundaries and I allowed people to just walk on in. Life hit me again in the same season, identity theft. And it wasn't from a stranger, not from some scammer online. It was from someone I really thought was my friend. We prayed together, we ate together, we sat at each other's houses. I'd even had moments of hearing where there was a little line crossing with other people, but I just gave the benefit of the doubt because I thought, no, our relationship was better than that. I didn't know for 9 months she was living in an apartment in my name. That betrayal cut deeper than the financial mess that I found myself in. But it was the realization that I had ignored the quiet warnings inside of me again. I wanted so badly to see the good that I handed her the keys, not just to my home, but to my life. And here's where it all came together for me. The only reason any of this was happening, because I allowed it. 3 marriages, family struggles, betrayal, all of them showed me the same lesson. If I didn't own my boundaries, someone else will. Once I decided that my yes means yes and my no means no, everything began to change. Boundaries stopped being about keeping people out and started being about keeping my peace in. They taught me my worth. They made me secure in who I am. They gave me peace. And they reminded me that they're mine. And it's not for negotiation. Now I want to leave you with a poem that holds the clarity, the revelation that I live by today. I used to think love meant letting people cross the line, that grace was an open door with no locks, no guard. But love is not boundaryless. Grace is not the absence of wisdom. Now I stand in the gates of my peace, and I decide who gets to enter. Some are welcome in the gardens. Others I love from the other side of the fence, because my heart is sacred ground, and I am finally the keeper. So I'll ask you this. Where in your life have you been bending your boundaries? And what would happen if you finally stood on them? Boundaries saved my life in marriage, in family, in friendships. And if you've been struggling to set them, I promise it's never too late. I'm putting up a poll today. When did you first realize you needed boundaries?